Get on your knees and keep your hands where I can see them. The words cut through the cold night air like a command that had been said too many times to too many people. But this time, something about it felt different, heavier, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Red and blue lights pulsed against the wet pavement, reflecting off parked cars and storefront windows, turning an ordinary Washington, D.C. street into a stage of tension and judgment. A small crowd had already begun to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the unmistakable gravity of a police stop escalating into something more. Phones were out. Eyes were fixed. No one spoke loudly, but the silence between whispers carried its own weight. At the center of it all stood Naomi Carter, her wrists held firmly behind her back, her posture steady despite the chaos surrounding her. She wasn't running. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't even raising her voice. Instead, she stood there with a calm that didn't match the situation, a stillness that felt almost out of place beneath the glare of headlights and the sharp tone of authority. Officer Travis Cole stepped closer, his voice firm, controlled, but edged with something colder. "You match the description," he said, as if that sentence alone was enough to define everything about her in that moment. Officer Brent Harlow circled slightly to the side, watching her carefully, his hand hovering near his radio, his eyes scanning her like he had already made up his mind long before she ever spoke a word. Naomi inhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes not out of fear, but out of control. "Officer," she said, her voice low, steady, almost quiet enough to be missed beneath the hum of engines and distant traffic. "This is a mistake." The words didn't change anything. If anything, they seemed to harden the air around them. A few people in the crowd exchanged looks, some uneasy, others curious, all of them witnessing a moment they didn't fully understand yet. The city lights flickered across Naomi's face, catching the subtle tension in her jaw, the focus in her eyes. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't breaking. And that, more than anything, made the scene feel off. Travis glanced at Brent, then back at Naomi, his tone sharpening just enough to assert control. "Then you won't mind cooperating," he said. It wasn't a question. It never was. Naomi didn't respond right away. Instead, her gaze shifted slightly past them, not toward the crowd, not toward the flashing lights, but somewhere else entirely, as if she were measuring something invisible, something no one else could see. For a brief second, the noise of the scene seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet tension that settled in the space between her silence and their certainty. Imagine standing there, surrounded by strangers, lights in your eyes, decisions already made about you before you even had the chance to explain. Imagine knowing that in less than a minute, everything about this moment could change, not with force, not with anger, but with something far more precise. Naomi exhaled again, steady, controlled, and finally spoke, her voice carrying just enough to reach both officers clearly. "I need to make a call." Travis let out a short breath, almost a laugh, shaking his head slightly, as if the request confirmed exactly what he had already decided. "You'll get your call later," he replied. But Naomi didn't move, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him, calm, unwavering, as the lights continued to flash and the crowd leaned in just a little closer. Because what no one there understood, not the officers, not the people watching, not even the ones recording every second of it, was that this moment wasn't the beginning of a problem. It was the beginning of an ending. And in a city built on power, influence, and decisions made behind closed doors, one call was about to reach further than any of them could possibly imagine. The rain had started lightly, barely more than a mist, but under the streetlights it shimmered like a veil over the scene, softening nothing and hiding even less. The city kept moving around them, cars slowing just enough to look, engines idling longer than necessary, strangers becoming witnesses without permission. Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, her wrists secured, her shoulders squared, her expression unchanged, as if the chaos surrounding her belonged to someone else. Officer Brent Harlow adjusted his stance, glancing toward the growing crowd, then back at Naomi with a look that mixed impatience and quiet certainty. "We are doing this the easy way," he said, his voice low but firm, as though repeating a line he had used many times before. Naomi did not respond. Not immediately. Instead, she listened, not just to him, but to everything. The distant siren blocks away. The soft murmur of people recording. The static crackle from the officers' radios. And beneath it all, something else. Timing. She shifted her gaze briefly to the digital display on a nearby storefront window, the glowing numbers reflecting faintly in her eyes. 8:43 p.m. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Officer Travis Cole followed her glance and frowned slightly, misreading it entirely. "You looking for someone?" he asked, his tone edged with suspicion, as if even her silence required explanation. Naomi exhaled slowly. "I already told you," she said, calm, measured, every word deliberate. "This is a mistake." Travis shook his head, stepping closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You people always say that," he replied, not loudly, but loud enough for the nearest phones to catch it. A ripple passed through the crowd, subtle but real, the kind of shift that happens when a line is crossed without being acknowledged. Naomi heard it. She felt it. But she did not react. That was what unsettled them the most. Not resistance. Not fear. Control. Brent reached for her bag again, checking its contents with quick, practiced movements, pulling out a slim folder, a phone, a few personal items. Nothing that matched the urgency of the stop. Nothing that justified the escalation that had already happened. He paused for a second, staring at the phone. It was not new, not flashy, but something about it made him hesitate. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up slightly. Naomi's eyes followed the movement, her focus sharpening just a fraction. "It is mine," she said simply. Brent scoffed lightly, but there was a flicker of uncertainty now, small, almost invisible, but there. Travis noticed it and stepped in, taking the phone from Brent's hand. "We will take a look at it downtown," he said, dismissive, already turning away. Naomi's voice stopped him before he could take another step. "You do not want to do that." It was not a threat. It was not raised. It was not emotional. It was a statement. Clean. Controlled. Certain. Travis turned back slowly, his expression tightening. "And why is that?" he asked. The rain picked up slightly, tapping against the pavement, against the hoods of cars, against the silence that was beginning to stretch too long between them. Naomi held his gaze, steady, unwavering, the kind of eye contact that did not challenge, but did not yield either. "Because this is the part," she said quietly, "where you still have a choice." For a moment, no one moved. Not Travis. Not Brent. Not even the crowd. It was as if the entire street had paused, suspended between what had already happened and what was about to unfold. Then the radio on Travis's shoulder crackled suddenly, a sharp burst of static cutting through the air. He reached for it instinctively, pressing the button, his attention shifting just enough to break the moment. "Unit 12, confirm status," the voice on the other end said, routine, unaware, ordinary. Travis responded quickly, his tone returning to control. "We have a suspect detained. Possible match. Conducting field investigation." There was a pause. A brief one. Then the voice came back, slightly different this time. "Copy that. Stand by." Travis lowered the radio, dismissing it, turning back to Naomi with the same confidence he had held from the start. But something had changed. Not in him. Not yet. In the air. In the rhythm of the moment. Naomi saw it before anyone else did. She shifted her weight slightly, just enough to straighten her posture completely, rain collecting along the edge of her sleeves. Her voice, when she spoke again, was even quieter than before, but it carried further than anything else on that street. "Now," she said, "I need to make that call." Travis Cole stared at her for a moment longer than necessary, the kind of pause that was supposed to assert control, but instead revealed hesitation creeping in at the edges. Rain gathered along the brim of his cap and slid down in thin lines, catching the flashing lights in brief streaks of red and blue. "You already asked," he said finally, his tone flatter now, less certain than before. "And I already told you how this works." Naomi did not blink. She did not shift. If anything, she seemed more still than before, as if the world around her had begun to move too slowly to matter. "No," she replied, her voice calm, steady, almost quiet enough to disappear beneath the hum of the city. "You told me how you think this works." Brent Harlow let out a short breath beside him. A quiet exhale that carried both impatience and something harder to define. He glanced again at the phone in Travis's hand, then back at Naomi, trying to read something in her expression and finding nothing he could use. The crowd had grown thicker now, more phones raised, more faces illuminated by screens than by streetlights. A man near the curb whispered something under his breath, shaking his head. A woman a few feet away folded her arms, watching closely, her expression no longer curious but concerned. The moment was stretching, pulling tighter with every second that passed. Travis lifted the phone slightly, turning it over in his hand, as if expecting it to reveal something obvious, something simple. It did not. It was just a device. Ordinary on the outside. Unremarkable. And yet the way Naomi watched it, the way her focus narrowed just enough to follow every movement, made it feel like more than that. You keep looking at this like it matters, Travis said, a faint edge returning to his voice as he tried to regain ground. It is just a phone. Naomi's eyes met his again, steady, unshaken. It is not the phone, she said. It is who answers it. The words landed softly, but they did not disappear. They stayed there, hanging in the air between them, forcing themselves into the space Travis thought he controlled. Brent shifted his weight again, this time more noticeably, his gaze flicking toward the patrol car, then back to the crowd, then finally to Travis. "We should move this," he muttered under his breath, not loud enough for the crowd, but loud enough for Travis to hear. Travis ignored him for a second, still focused on Naomi, still trying to hold on to the version of the situation he had decided on from the beginning. But doubt, once it appears, does not leave easily. It lingers. It waits. It grows. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, the voice on the other end no longer casual, no longer routine. "Unit 12, confirm your location again," the dispatcher said, the tone just slightly off, just enough to be noticed. Travis pressed the button, his response quick, controlled. "We are on 14th and L Street. Situation is under control." There was another pause, longer this time. Then the reply came back, slower, more deliberate. "Copy. Stand by for supervisory." Brent's head turned immediately, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Supervisory," he repeated under his breath, the word landing heavier than it should have. Travis did not answer right away. He lowered the radio slowly, his grip tightening just a fraction, his attention shifting back to Naomi with a look that was no longer as certain as it had been minutes ago. Naomi saw it. She had been waiting for it. Not the call. Not yet. Just this. The first crack. The moment where certainty begins to question itself. She adjusted her stance slightly, straightening fully now, the rain darkening the fabric of her sleeves, her posture unshaken, composed, deliberate. "Time matters," she said quietly, her voice cutting clean through the noise without ever rising above it. "And you are running out of it." Travis frowned, a reflex more than a reaction, his mind trying to reconcile the calm in her voice with the situation he believed he was controlling. "You do not get to dictate anything here," he replied, but the words lacked the weight they had carried before. Naomi did not argue. She did not push. She simply held his gaze, letting the silence do what her voice did not need to. Imagine standing there, watching everything you thought was routine begin to shift in ways you cannot explain, feeling control slip not because someone took it from you, but because it was never yours to begin with. The rain fell a little harder now, tapping steadily against the pavement, against the metal of the patrol car, against the stillness that had settled into the scene. Naomi extended her hands slightly forward, not in surrender, not in defiance, but in clarity. "Give me the phone," she said, calm, direct, undeniable. Brent looked at Travis. Travis looked at the phone. And for the first time since this had started, neither of them moved immediately. Because something about the way she said it made it feel less like a request, and more like the last moment before everything changed. The hesitation did not last long, but it lasted long enough to change everything. Travis Cole looked down at the phone in his hand again, then back at Naomi Carter, his expression tightening as if forcing himself back into the version of authority he understood. "You are not in a position to make demands," he said, each word measured, deliberate, an attempt to reclaim the ground that had begun to shift beneath him. But the words no longer carried the same weight. Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch just enough to make it uncomfortable, just enough to make everyone aware of it. The rain continued to fall, steady now, a soft but constant rhythm against the pavement, against the metal of the patrol car, against the tension that had settled over the scene like a second layer of air. The crowd leaned in closer without realizing it, drawn not by noise, but by the absence of it. Naomi's hands remained extended slightly forward, her posture unchanged, her gaze locked on Travis with a calm that refused to break. "I am not making a demand," she said finally, her voice even, controlled, precise. "I am giving you a chance." Brent Harlow shifted again, more visibly this time, his unease no longer subtle. He glanced toward the intersection, then down the street, as if expecting something to appear, something to confirm the growing feeling that this situation was no longer routine. "Travis," he muttered, quieter now, the edge gone from his voice, replaced with something closer to caution. "We should wait." Travis did not answer him. Not right away. His eyes stayed on Naomi, searching for something that would justify ignoring what he was beginning to feel. Something he could point to and say, "This is why I am right." But there was nothing there. No panic. No confusion. No contradiction. Just certainty. And certainty, in a moment like this, was more unsettling than anything else. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, sharper, the voice on the other and no longer neutral. "Unit 12, supervisory en route. Confirm you are holding position." Travis pressed the button quickly, his response automatic, almost reflexive. "Affirmative. Holding position." He released the button, but his hand lingered there for a second longer than it needed to. Brent noticed. Naomi noticed. The crowd did not, but they felt it. The shift. The subtle unraveling of control that had once seemed absolute. Naomi lowered her hands slightly, not in defeat, but in patience, as if she had already accounted for this delay, as if this moment was simply part of a sequence she had seen before. "You are about to have more people here," she said quietly. "More questions, more eyes, and less room to explain why. You did not listen when you still could." Travis let out a short breath, shaking his head as if to clear it, as if to push back against the doubt pressing in from every side. "You keep talking like you know how this ends," he said, his tone sharper now, but not stronger. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "I do," she replied. No emphasis, no threat, just truth. The kind of truth that does not need to be raised to be heard. Brent looked between them, then back down at the phone still in Travis's hand. "Just let her make the call," he said, this time not as a suggestion, but as something closer to advice. Travis did not like that. It showed in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his grip on the phone shifted slightly, in the way he glanced briefly toward the crowd before returning his focus to Naomi. He was aware of them now, aware of the cameras, the witnesses, the fact that whatever happened next would not stay contained to this street. The rain picked up again, heavier now, blurring the edges of the scene, softening the lights, but sharpening everything else. Naomi stood there, unmoved, as if the rain did not touch her, as if the cold did not reach her. "This is the last moment where this stays small," she said, her voice steady, unbroken. "After that, it becomes something else." Travis stared at her, the words settling in whether he wanted them to or not. For a second, he looked down at the phone again, then at Brent, then back at Naomi. The decision sat there, right in front of him, simple and impossible at the same time. Finally, with a controlled exhale, he extended the phone toward her, just enough for her to take it, but not enough to admit fully what he was doing. Naomi accepted it without hesitation, her movements calm, deliberate, as if this had always been the next step. She did not rush. She did not fumble. She simply turned the phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen for a brief moment before pressing a sequence of numbers not saved under any name. The line began to ring, and for the first time since this started, no one spoke at all. The ringing was quiet, almost too quiet for a moment. That carried so much weight, a soft tone repeating in Naomi Carter's ear while the world around her seemed to slow down to match its rhythm. One ring, two, three, each one stretching longer than it should, pulling the tension tighter with every passing second. Travis Cole stood just a few feet away, watching her closely, his eyes fixed on her face as if he could read the outcome of the call before it even connected. Brent Harlow shifted again, his attention no longer on Naomi alone but on everything, the street, the crowd, the radio at his shoulder, the growing sense that something had already moved beyond their control. The rain continued to fall steadily now, tracing thin lines down Naomi's sleeve as she held the phone to her ear, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, almost detached. Then, without warning, the ringing stopped. A click, silence for half a heartbeat, and then a voice on the other end, low, composed, and unmistakably alert. Naomi did not hesitate. "This is Naomi Carter," she said, her tone precise, controlled, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Local officers initiated a high-escalation stop. Weapons drawn. "I am being detained on 14th and L." There was no panic in her voice. No rush. Just information, delivered the way it was meant to be received. The response on the other end did not come immediately, but when it did, it carried a different kind of weight, the kind that does not need volume to be understood. Naomi listened for a moment, her gaze steady, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," she replied. "I am still on site." She paused again, listening, the faintest shift in her eyes signaling that something had just been confirmed, something final. "Understood." She lowered the phone slightly, not ending the call, just enough to let the silence settle back over the street. Travis frowned, stepping half a pace closer, his voice tight with forced control. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, but the question no longer carried authority. It carried uncertainty. Naomi turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze, the calm still there, but now layered with something else, something firmer, something resolved. "Someone who is about to ask you the same question," she said quietly. The words did not echo, but they landed. Brent glanced toward Travis again, his unease no longer hidden. "This is not right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Something is not right." Travis ignored him, or tried to, his focus locked on Naomi as if refusing to look anywhere else would keep everything contained. "You think making a call changes anything?" he said. But even as he spoke, his radio crackled again, sharper than before, the voice on the other end no longer routine, no longer detached. "Unit 12, confirm status immediately." Travis pressed the button, his response quick but edged now with something he could not fully suppress. "We are still on scene. Situation under control." There was no pause this time. The reply came back instantly, the tone direct, unmistakably different. "Stand by. Do not disengage. Supervisor arriving with federal liaison." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything that had been said so far. Brent's head snapped toward Travis. "Federal?" he repeated under his breath, the single word carrying more weight than a full sentence. Travis did not answer. He lowered the radio slowly, his grip tightening, his eyes shifting briefly, just for a second, toward the end of the street. Naomi saw it. She saw the exact moment the certainty broke, the exact second where control slipped from assumption into reality. She raised the phone back to her ear, her voice quiet again, but now there was no need for explanation. "They have been notified," she said, listening briefly before adding, "I will remain here." Another pause. Another confirmation. Then she ended the call. No dramatic gesture. No visible reaction. Just a simple movement of her thumb, returning the screen to black. The street did not erupt. The crowd did not shout. But something had changed. Completely. Travis shifted his stance, no longer squared in control but slightly angled, as if adjusting to something he could not yet see. Brent looked down the road again, this time not out of habit, but expectation. And in the distance, faint at first, then growing clearer, the outline of dark vehicles began to appear, moving with purpose, steady, direct, unmistakable. Naomi lowered her hands, no longer needing to hold the phone up, her posture relaxed but not diminished, her presence unchanged. She looked at Travis one last time, her voice calm, almost quiet enough to be lost beneath the rain. "This is where it changes," she said. And this time, no one questioned her. The vehicles did not arrive with noise or spectacle, but with a quiet precision that made everything else on that street feel suddenly smaller. Dark silhouettes moved through the rain, headlights cutting clean lines across the wet pavement as they approached, steady and deliberate, not rushing, not hesitating. The kind of arrival that did not ask for attention, but commanded it anyway. Brent Harlow saw them first, his posture stiffening almost instantly, his eyes narrowing as recognition began to form before understanding could catch up. "Travis," he said under his breath, but this time there was no edge, no impatience, just urgency wrapped in uncertainty. Travis followed his gaze, turning slightly, and for a brief second, the mask slipped. Not entirely, not enough for anyone in the crowd to fully see, but enough for Naomi Carter to notice. Enough for her to know that the moment had passed the point of return. The vehicle slowed to a controlled stop a short distance away, engines idling low, doors opening without hesitation. Figures stepped out, not in a rush, but with purpose, their movements coordinated in a way that did not need to be explained. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just presence. Authority that did not need to prove itself. The rain continued to fall, but it no longer softened anything. If anything, it sharpened the scene, each drop catching the light, each movement becoming clearer against the darkened street. The crowd shifted instinctively, stepping back without being told, creating space not out of fear, but out of recognition that something larger than the moment they had been recording was now unfolding. Travis straightened, his shoulders pulling back as if instinct alone could restore the control he felt slipping away. "Stay here," he said to Brent, though the words sounded more like a habit than a command. Brent did not answer. He was already watching the approaching figures, his attention locked on them, his earlier certainty gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier. Naomi remained where she was, unmoving, her hands relaxed at her sides now, her posture unchanged, as if the arrival of these vehicles was not a surprise, not a disruption, but an expected step in a sequence she had already accepted. One of the figures moved forward from the group, a woman in a dark coat, her pace measured, her gaze direct. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at the flashing lights. She looked straight at Naomi, and Naomi looked back. No words passed between them, but something did. A recognition, a confirmation, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be understood. Travis stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Naomi and the approaching woman, his voice firm, though the firmness felt thinner now, stretched over something less stable. "This is an active investigation," he said. "We have the situation under control." The woman did not stop immediately, but when she did, it was close enough to remove any distance that Travis might have relied on. She held his gaze for a moment, not challenging, not confrontational, simply steady. "I am aware," she said, her voice calm, precise, carrying a quiet authority that did not rise, did not push, but did not yield either. She reached into her coat, not abruptly, not in a way that caused alarm, but in a way that signaled intention. What she presented was not held up dramatically, not displayed for the crowd, but shown directly to Travis, close enough that only he could see it clearly. His reaction was immediate, though subtle. A shift in his stance, a tightening of his expression, a brief flicker in his eyes that spoke louder than any words could have. Brent saw it from the side, and that was enough. The radio on Travis's shoulder remained silent now, but it did not need to speak. Everything it needed to say had already been said. Naomi took a small step forward, not breaking any boundary, not forcing any movement, just enough to align herself with the moment as it unfolded. The woman in the dark coat turned slightly toward her, her voice lowering just enough to separate their conversation from everything else. "Are you all right?" she asked. Naomi gave a small nod. Nothing more, nothing less. "I am," she replied. The simplicity of it carried more weight than anything else that had been said that night. Travis lowered his hand slowly, the one that had been resting near his radio, his posture no longer squared in command but adjusting, recalibrating, trying to find footing in a situation that no longer followed the rules he had expected. Brent exhaled quietly, the tension leaving him in a way that felt less like relief and more like realization. The crowd remained silent, phones still raised. But now they were not just recording an incident. They were witnessing a shift. Naomi looked at Travis again, her expression unchanged, her voice calm, but now final. "You should start thinking about what happens next," she said. And this time, there was no doubt left in the air at all. No one raised their voice, and yet everything that followed carried more weight than anything that had happened before. The woman in the dark coat shifted her attention fully to Travis Cole, her expression unchanged, her presence steady in a way that did not challenge him directly, but left no room for misunderstanding. "Officer," she said calmly, "I need you to step back." It was not phrased as a command, but it functioned like one. Travis did not move right away. For a brief second, the instinct to hold his ground surfaced again, the last trace of authority trying to anchor itself in a situation that had already moved beyond him. "With all due respect," he began, his tone controlled but thinner now, "we are in the middle of—" "You were," she interrupted, not raising her voice, not cutting him off sharply, just placing the words exactly where they needed to be. The distinction settled in immediately. "You were, not are." Brent Harlow felt it before Travis did. He took a small step back without being told, his hands lowering slightly, his posture shifting from enforcement to observation. The transition was quiet, almost invisible, but it changed the entire balance of the scene. The woman reached into her coat again, this time producing a small device and speaking into it briefly, her words low, precise, coded in a way that only those trained to hear them would understand. Within seconds, 2 additional individuals moved forward from the vehicles behind her, their presence reinforcing what had already been made clear. This was no longer a street stop. This was something else entirely. Naomi Carter stood just behind them, her expression composed, her gaze steady, not watching the crowd, not watching the officers, but watching the process unfold exactly as she had expected. Imagine standing there and realizing that the moment you thought defined someone else has suddenly begun to define you instead. Imagine understanding, not all at once, but in pieces, that every decision you made in the last 10 minutes is now being examined in a completely different light. Travis felt it now, not as a single realization, but as a sequence. The call, the response, the arrival, the identification he had just seen but not fully processed. It all began to align in a way that left very little room for interpretation. "What is this?" he asked, but the question lacked direction. It was not aimed at Naomi, not fully at the woman in front of him. It was aimed at the situation itself, at the shift he could no longer control. The woman in the coat met his gaze again, her tone unchanged. "This is a review," she said, "and right now, you are part of it." The words were simple, but they carried a finality that settled deep. One of the individuals behind her stepped slightly to the side, speaking quietly into a radio, relaying information that moved faster than anything visible on that street. Brent swallowed, his eyes moving from Travis to Naomi and back again, the pieces coming together faster for him now. "We did not know," he said under his breath, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Naomi heard him. She did not respond immediately. She let the silence hold for a second longer, then turned her head just enough for her voice to reach him clearly. "You did not ask," she said. No anger, no accusation, just a fact. And facts, in moments like this, were harder to deflect than anything else. Travis exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting from control to something else entirely. He glanced down at the ground for a brief second, rainwater pooling around the edges of his boots, before lifting his gaze again, this time not with authority, but with recognition that the situation had moved beyond him. The woman in the coat nodded slightly to the individuals behind her, a small signal that set the next steps into motion. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just quiet coordination. Brent stepped back another pace, his earlier certainty completely gone now, replaced by a stillness that mirrored Naomi's, though for entirely different reasons. The crowd remained silent, their phones still recording, but now the energy had shifted from curiosity to something heavier, something closer to witnessing accountability in real time. Naomi took a slow breath, the rain continuing to fall around her, her presence unchanged from the moment this began. She looked at Travis one more time, her expression calm, but now there was something else there as well. Not satisfaction, not relief, just clarity. "This is the part where it becomes official," she said quietly. And for the first time since the lights had started flashing on that street, Travis did not try to respond at all. It did not explode into chaos. It did not turn loud or dramatic or cinematic in the way people expect when power shifts hands. Instead, it became quieter, controlled, precise, and that silence carried more consequence than any raised voice ever could. The woman in the dark coat gave a small nod, and everything that followed moved with a kind of efficiency that left no space for confusion. One of the officials stepped forward, speaking directly to Travis Cole in a tone that was calm but unmistakably firm. "Officer, we are going to need you to step aside and refrain from further engagement." No accusation, no emotion, just instruction. Travis did not argue, Not this time. His shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition. He took a single step back, then another, creating distance not just physically, but symbolically, separating himself from a situation he had initiated but no longer controlled. Brent Harlow mirrored the movement almost immediately, stepping back without being told, his earlier uncertainty now replaced by a quiet acceptance of what was unfolding. The officials moved in closer, not surrounding, not crowding, but positioning themselves with deliberate intent. One of them spoke into a device, relaying information with short, clear phrases. Another reached toward the patrol vehicle, not aggressively, but methodically, noting details, observing, documenting. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was overlooked. Naomi Carter remained still, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady as she watched the system shift into a different gear entirely. This was not reaction. This was procedure. Imagine standing there and realizing that everything you thought was informal, flexible, something you could shape in the moment, has suddenly become structured, recorded, and irreversible. Imagine understanding that every word, every decision, every second is now part of something that will not disappear when the lights turn off. Travis felt it settle around him like a weight that did not press down, but held everything in place. He looked at the woman in the coat again, then briefly at Naomi, then away, his eyes no longer searching for control, but for footing. What happens now? He asked, and for the first time, the question was not rhetorical. The woman answered without hesitation. Now it gets documented, she said. Fully. The word lingered. Fully. Not partially. Not selectively. Brent let out a slow breath, his hands resting at his sides, his posture no longer defensive, no longer assertive, just present. One of the officials approached him next, speaking in the same calm tone. We will need your identification and a brief statement. Brent nodded immediately, reaching for his credentials without resistance, his movements careful, deliberate, as if aware now that even the smallest action carried weight. The crowd remained at a distance, quieter than before, the energy no longer charged with curiosity, but with something heavier. Understanding. The realization that what they were witnessing was not just an incident, but a turning point. Naomi shifted slightly, just enough to release the last of the tension from her shoulders, though her expression remained composed. She was not watching for validation. She was not waiting for reaction. She was simply present, as she had been from the beginning, her calm no longer questioned, but explained by everything that had followed. The rain continued to fall, steady and consistent, washing over the street, over the flashing lights, over the moment itself, but not erasing anything. Travis ran a hand briefly along the side of his jacket, a small, unconscious gesture, then let it fall back to his side. He did not speak again. There was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set into motion. The officials continued their work, documenting, confirming, relaying, each step building on the last with quiet precision. Naomi turned her head slightly, her gaze moving past the officers, past the vehicles, toward the city beyond, its lights steady in the distance, unchanged by what had just happened on this one street. Then she looked back, her voice calm, almost reflective, but carrying a clarity that cut through everything else. It does not take much, she said, for a moment to become a record. No one responded. They did not need to, because by then, it already had. The rain began to ease, not stopping entirely but softening, as if the city itself had decided the moment had reached its conclusion. The flashing lights were still there, casting red and blue reflections across the pavement, but they no longer defined the scene. What defined it now was something quieter, something that would last longer than the sound of sirens or the glow of emergency lights. It was the record. Naomi Carter stood where she had been from the beginning, her posture steady, her expression unchanged, but the weight of the moment around her had shifted completely. What had started as suspicion had turned into documentation. What had been assumption had become evidence. And what had been control had dissolved into accountability. The officials continued their work with the same calm precision, voices low, movements measured, every detail noted without urgency, but with absolute clarity. There was no rush because there was no need. The outcome was no longer uncertain. Travis Cole remained a few steps back now, no longer at the center of anything, his presence reduced to observation, his earlier certainty replaced by a stillness that spoke louder than any defense he might have offered. He watched as each step unfolded, as each quiet instruction carried more authority than any command he had given earlier that night. Brent Harlow stood beside him, his posture mirroring the same realization, his gaze fixed somewhere between the ground and the process happening in front of him, as if trying to understand how quickly everything had changed. But the truth was, it had not changed quickly at all. It had changed the moment they stopped asking questions and started assuming answers. Imagine standing there and realizing that the moment you thought would disappear into routine has instead become something permanent, something that follows you beyond the street, beyond the shift, beyond the uniform itself. Naomi turned slightly, her eyes moving across the scene one last time, not searching, not reacting, just observing. The crowd had begun to thin, some people lowering their phones, others stepping away slowly, carrying with them the quiet understanding that they had witnessed something more than just an encounter. They had witnessed a line being drawn, not loudly, not forcefully, but clearly. The woman in the dark coat approached Naomi once more, her tone softer now, but still precise. "You are free to go," she said. Naomi gave a small nod, acknowledging the words without needing anything more. She adjusted her sleeve slightly, a simple movement, almost ordinary, and yet it marked the end of everything that had started just minutes before. She took a step forward, then another, moving past the officers, past the vehicles, past the place where the moment had unfolded. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. And that, more than anything else, said everything that needed to be said. Travis watched her go, his expression unreadable, but his silence complete. There was nothing left for him to claim, nothing left to justify. Only the record remained. Naomi paused briefly at the edge of the street, the city lights stretching out in front of her, steady and unchanged. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, without turning back, she spoke, her voice calm, carrying just enough to reach those who were still listening. "The law does not fail in silence," she said. "People do." She continued walking, disappearing into the rhythm of the city as if she had never been stopped at all. And behind her, under the fading lights and the quiet rain, the system she had faced did not collapse in anger or noise. It corrected itself, one measured step at a time. Because in the end, it was never about who held the power in that moment. It was about who understood what it was meant for.